I think one of the most dangerous voices in our lives sounds incredibly reasonable. You know that voice, the one that tells us to wait. Wait until the economy improves. Wait until we have more money. Wait until the kids get older. Wait until life settles down. Wait until we're more confident or more certain. Wait until we're ready. Here's the interesting thing. That voice never asks us to quit. It never tells us to give up on the dream. It never says, don't do it. It simply says, not yet. And because that advice sounds so reasonable, we listen. And then a week passes, a month passes, a year passes, sometimes an entire decade passes. The danger isn't that we choose no. The danger is that we keep choosing later. And later has a way of becoming never. I've spent years coaching people who wanted something more from their lives. A bigger business, better health, stronger marriage, more meaningful work, a dream they couldn't let go of, stronger relationships. But what fascinated me was that each of them usually knew what they needed to do. They weren't lacking intelligence or information. The challenge wasn't knowing the next step. The challenge was taking it before certainty arrived. And the longer I've coached, the more I've realized they were confronting the same voice that I had heard throughout my own life. I've felt that voice before almost every meaningful decision that I've ever made. I felt it before I walked away from a secure paycheck and a predictable career to better myself years and years ago. I felt it on that rainy morning back in 2011 when I pulled my Jeep Cherokee into a empty subdivision on the side of the road and wrote a letter to my future self. I felt it before sharing that letter with anyone else. I felt it before teaching the process to clients. I felt it before spending years turning that process into a book. The circumstances changed, yes, but the voice rarely did. For a long time, I thought that voice was fear. Now that I think about it, I don't think that's quite right. Fear is certainly a part of the story, but I believe something deeper is happening. I think we're listening to a version of ourselves that was built for survival. From the prehistoric times, long before there were businesses to build, books to write, goals to pursue, and dreams to chase, human beings had one primary responsibility: stay alive, stay close to the tribe, avoid danger, conserve energy, live long enough to see tomorrow. And that wiring is still there. It's why you don't walk into moving traffic. It's why you pull your hand away from a hot stove. It's why your body reacts before your conscious mind fully catches up. Look, the system works exactly the way it's designed to work. The challenge is that same wiring that physically protects us often shows up in the rest of our lives. And over the years, I've come to call that voice the default self. The default self wants familiarity because familiarity feels safe. It wants certainty because certainty feels risky. It wants belonging because rejection hurts. It wants comfort because comfort asks very little of us. And once I saw those patterns, I started seeing them everywhere. I saw familiarity in people who knew they had outgrown a situation, but stayed because it was predictable. I saw certainty in people who kept waiting until they felt ready before taking action. I saw belonging in people who slowly began making decisions based on acceptance rather than authenticity, who they actually are. And I saw comfort in all ways that we avoid difficult conversations, difficult decisions, and difficult change because discomfort asks something from us. And one of the clearest examples of the default self showing up in my own life It happened when my family and I decided to move to Hawaii for a year back in 2017. At the time, we were living in Boise, Idaho. My bride, Nicole, and I had talked about the idea back and forth for a while. We had a plan. We had a year to execute. We had a house lined up. We had flights booked. Everything seemed to be falling into place. And then just 2 weeks before we were scheduled to leave, the house fell through. And suddenly, the entire plan felt irresponsible. We had 2 kids, Zach, who was 14, and Aspen, who was 11 at the time. And now we had no place to live, no backup plan, no certainty. What had felt like an adventure now felt reckless. And I remember sitting at my computer, staring at the cancel flight button. My heart was pounding. My mind immediately went to work, building on a case of why we shouldn't go. Be responsible. You have kids. What if this doesn't work? What if you get there and can't find a place to live? What if this whole thing becomes a disaster? The arguments sounded logical. They sounded reasonable. In fact, they sounded pretty wise at the time. And that's the thing about the default self, is it rarely sounds negative. It rarely sounds like fear. Most of the time, it sounds responsible. It sounds practical. It sounds like common sense. And in that moment, familiarity, certainty, belonging, comfort were all pulling me in the same direction. Stay in Boise. Stay with what you know. Stay with what you can predict. Stay where your business is. Stay where your friends are. Stay where the answers are clear. Stay where it's safe. But then there was the other voice that was much quieter and very hard to hear. Yet I knew it was there. And simply said, F it. Go anyway. I remember thinking about my kids. What kind of message would it send if I backed out now? What would they learn if they only chased dreams when everything went according to plan? Then I thought about my bride. What kind of husband would I be if I only pursued our dreams when the outcome was guaranteed? Really? And what would happen if I spent the rest of my life waiting for certainty before taking action? So, with sweaty palms and a racing heart, I clicked away from cancel flight, and we got on the plane. What happened next became one of the greatest experiences of our lives. Yes, we ended up finding a house, better than the one that we had before. We built friendships that felt like family. We created memories that we still talk about today. And I can still picture standing on our lanai at sunset, looking out over the Pacific Ocean, knowing deep in my soul that we're exactly where we were supposed to be. And then something unexpected happened that we never could have predicted. About 6 months into that year, Nicole and I and the family realized we weren't going back to Idaho. The move to Hawaii wasn't the destination. It ended up being a bridge. We didn't know that at the time. We hadn't prepared for that before we moved to Hawaii. Not at all. We started talking about what we wanted next. We started dreaming again. We started imagining a different future for our family. And eventually that path led us to Austin, Texas, where we've been living since 2018. And looking back, there is no way that I could have seen Austin from Boise. I thought I needed the entire plan before taking the step. Life had a different idea. And the older I get, the more convinced I become that the default self wants the entire plan. However, life usually reveals the plan one step at a time. Hawaii taught me that. Writing the 10-year letter taught me that. Building the workshop taught me that. Writing the book taught me that. Some of the most important chapters of my life began without certainty, but they began with willingness. The unexpected positives only reveal themselves when we're willing to move forward, when we're willing to take action. If I had listened to the default self, I would have stayed home and convinced myself I was being responsible. Instead, I would have missed one of the most meaningful chapters of my life and a path that eventually led our family somewhere that we never could have predicted. The default self isn't your enemy. It's been protecting you for years. The question is whether protection has quietly become limitation. Because one day you'll wake up in the future that you're creating now. The conversations that you're avoiding, the risks you're postponing, the decisions that you're delaying, the dreams you've convinced yourself can wait. They're all helping write your future. And maybe that's the real question. What is the cancel flight button in your life right now? Because the life you're capable of creating may be waiting on the other side of a decision that feels really uncomfortable today. So, the question is whether you'll let the default self keep holding the pen, or whether you're ready to take it back and write the future you're excited to live.